Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi College. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights. And each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. We are pleased to have the Christian History Institute sponsor this episode of the podcast. Find free resources and subscribe to their magazine at christianhistoryinstitute.org. Our first historical highlight of the week is Zachary Taylor's inauguration. Before the 20th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed, the inauguration of the president occurred on March 4th, not on January 20th. When Zachary Taylor was to be sworn in as president on March 4th, 1849, Inauguration Day fell on a Sunday, but Taylor refused to be sworn in on the Sabbath. This led to the ratification of the 20th Amendment, which moved the inauguration to January 20th. It was duly noted that if the 20th were a Sunday, the inauguration would take place on the 21st instead. Taylor would go on to serve only 15 months in office, becoming the second president to die during his term. Our next historical highlight and the subject of our deep dive is the Paulists. Father Isaac Hecker dreamed that the Protestant United States would be converted to Catholicism with a strong evangelical effort. He gathered with 3 other Catholic leaders and formed the Missionary Society of St. Paul, known as the Paulists. Pope Pius IX permitted them to proceed on March 6, 1858, though the group was officially founded in July of 1858. Our final historical highlight is the death of Thomas Aquinas on March 7, 1274. Aquinas was a political and theological church leader. His book, the Summa Theologiae, is renowned as a theological masterpiece that has had a profound impact on Western religious society. There is even a Catholic college in California named in Aquinas' honor. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, director of the Center for Christian History, talks with Father Ron Franco about the Paulists.
Hey, it's Nick Walters here again with yet another great deep dive on our podcast for This Week in Christian History. And we are focused this week on an event that happened on March the 6th in 1858 when Father Isaac Hecker received what we lay people may call the permission to go forward and create what is known as the Paulist Fathers here in the United States. And I have with me today Father Ron Franco, who is one of the Paulist Fathers that is knows a heck of a lot more about Isaac Hecker and the Paulist Fathers than I ever certainly will know. And he is in New York. And in addition to all of that, spent some time in Knoxville, Tennessee. Is that right, Father? Right?
Yes, I was pastor in Knoxville, Tennessee at Immaculate Conception Church, which is the oldest Catholic church in Knoxville.
How about that?
I was there from 2010 to 2020.
Okay.
And the church there was founded in 1855. We didn't take it over until 1973, the Paulist Fathers, but it was founded in 1855. So
how about that? All right,
so
that's
nice
good. You got to understand what real fried chicken was like then, right? I mean, somewhere in part of that. So, hey, but tell us, obviously the whole story about the Paulist Fathers is centered around Isaac Hecker. Whenever we want to be able to talk about him and about his background. And so why don't you just give us an overview, if you will, of him, and then let's talk more about the Paulist Fathers.
Okay, well, that's Isaac Hecker behind me, by the way, in that stained glass window.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's Isaac Hecker.
Okay.
Isaac Hecker was born in 1819. He was the youngest of several children in a German-American immigrant family in New York City and what we now call the Lower East Side. His father abandoned the family at some point early on, And his two older brothers, John and George, were very successful in the bakery business, and they eventually formulated flour in a distinctive way, which became known as Hecker flour. You may have heard of that. The brand still exists. It's now owned by Pillsbury, but I believe it was sold to Pillsbury. I'm not sure when, but anyway, so John and George made lots of money, and they were very active citizens. They're very active in local politics. In fact, John remained active in New York City Democratic Party politics till the end of his life. And their mother converted to Methodism. This was the period of the Great Awakening, or the tail end of the Second Great Awakening. So it was a period really when the United States became intensely religious country. And Isaac is part of that process as a boy. He has an early sense of himself. Maybe he gets this from his mother. I don't know, of him, that God has a plan for him in his life, although he doesn't know what that is. And as many people did at that time, he tries out many different religious denominations. He looks around, sees what's going on, and he comes under the influence of Orestes Brownson, who was at that time, a Unitarian preacher and public intellectual, as we would say today, in New England. And Brownson encouraged him to go to Boston to participate at Brook Farm, which was a kind of utopian community set up by a group of Transcendentalists who were Unitarians and other New England Congregationalists on the verge of becoming something else, that transition that was going on at that time, and a rejection basically of Orthodox Calvinism in favor of various other things. And so he was part of that group for a while. He was exposed to a lot of different intellectual and religious influences, and gradually, to his own surprise, he finds himself attracted to Roman Catholicism. And eventually in 1843, both he and Orestes Brownson become Catholics the same year. And then Isaac's brother George follows him into the church. John became an Episcopalian and remained one for the rest of his life, but George became a Catholic. And Isaac joined the Catholic Church on August 1st, 1844. And so once he does this is kind of the solution to the first part of his problem. What am I supposed to do with my life? And so he discovers, he writes a diary during this period, which is very interesting in terms of how he juggles these different religious influences and cultural influences and political concerns that he starts out with. And he says, so he realizes that the Holy Spirit, as he comes to recognize, to identify, has been leading him into the Catholic Church. Now what does he do? Well, now what does he find himself to do in this? And of course, he's attracted immediately to the priesthood. And after a year, he wants to join the Redemptorists. Now, the Redemptorists were a religious order founded by St. Aloysius Gonzaga in the 1700s in Naples.
We won't hold you to it. No worry.
All right. Yeah, they were founded to basically to reach out to marginalized people, on the margins of Neapolitan society who were being neglected by the institutional church. And so they founded the preaching mission. Now, you're probably familiar with what a revival movement was in the South. Well, parish missions were the same kind of thing in a Catholic world. So they were geared to bringing people back to the sacraments, get them to go to confession and communion and so forth. So the Redemptorists were founded to do that sort of thing. A group of them came to the United States and ministered mainly to German immigrants. So the Redemptorist province that he joined was German immigrants, serving German immigrants in the United States. So he goes to Europe, and remember, he's only been a Catholic for a year, so he's really just throwing himself into this experience, and he's enjoying the sense of this whole Catholic culture that he's imbibing for the first time. He's reading all these French Jesuits and Redemptorist spiritual writers and so forth. St. Alphonsus Liguori was the founder of the Redemptorists. I think I said Aloysius Gonzaga. That was an accident. He's a Jesuit. St. Alphonsus Liguori was the founder of the Redemptorists. And So, he's imbibing all this spiritual tradition. And after several years, he's eventually ordained a priest in England, in London,
Hmm.
in 1849. And he spends some time there, doing work with the Redemptorists there in London and Liverpool. And in 1851, the decision is made to have a parish mission band in the United States that would include native-born Americans,
Okay.
who could preach in English. And so Isaac Hecker is part of that group, and Clarence Walworth is also part of that group. And he becomes one of the most prominent preachers in American Catholicism at that period. So they are part of this larger group that is going around doing these parish missions in Redemptorist and other churches in the United States. They travel all over. They go around the South, as well as in the East. And gradually they also find themselves preaching to non-Catholics. And Isaac feels that this is his vocation. He feels he has been called to reach out to people like himself, people who were searchers, people who were looking for something new, who were unsatisfied with their religious experience. He felt that most people in the United States at that time, a lot of people didn't have denominational loyalties. They were just sort of generically Christian or looking for something, and that they needed to, so he was looking to reach out to them. And so there were 5 Redemptorist priests, all of whom had been converts like Isaac. So there was Isaac Hecker, there was Augustine Hewitt, there was George DeShawn, there was Francis Baker, and there, of course, was Clarence Walworth, who was the star of the group at that time. And they were all eager to get involved in this kind of work. So
You mean the work of not just trying to be Redemptorist or get quote unquote Catholics back into the fold.
In addition to doing that, to reach out to native-born Americans, English-speaking, because they were doing mainly work in German parishes, but they were spreading beyond that to English-speaking people. So, so now a dispute emerges basically with the Redemptorist leadership about, well, what is it that we're here to do? Because we need you to serve these German immigrants, and you want to do this other thing, which is maybe a good thing to do, but that's not what we're here to do. So there's this dispute going on. So finally, it's decided that Isaac will go to Rome to speak with the Redemptorist superiors in Rome to get permission to do this. They want to establish an English-speaking house that will focus entirely on work with native-born English-speaking Americans, and that would reach out to non-Catholics. So he goes to Rome. This is a very unsuccessful experience for him. He gets to Rome, and the Redemptorist Superior General is not impressed with him. He's one of the few people who wasn't. Hecker apparently was a very charming man, and he charmed people all his life. People all liked him, but this one case, it didn't work. And so he gets there, and he's dismissed from the order on the grounds that he had come to Rome without permission, because you needed permission to travel. You couldn't just show up and say, I want to do something. You had to get permission to go. And also that he'd used his brother's money in violation of his vow of poverty. Okay. So he was dismissed, and he was quite irate about this, as you might imagine, very, very disconsolate. But he was convinced that he had this calling from God to do this. So he appealed. Now, Isaac was well known in the United States. In the 1850s, as a Redemptorist priest, he had written 2 books. The first was called Questions of the Soul. The second was called Aspirations of Nature. And they both were basically, the first was more semi-autobiographical. It was, again, reaching out to searchers, seekers, such as he himself had been, with a kind of new kind of apologetics, an argument for the faith that was not based on historical quarrels with the Reformation and those kinds of things, which he felt didn't interest people and were not convincing to people, but rather appealing to their basis that human nature is called by God to relationship with God, and that the fulfillment of that is going to be in the Catholic Church. And this is very counterintuitive to most Americans at the time. So he really has to make his case, and he uses his own story, his own experience to do that. So he believes that the basic questions of the soul and the aspirations of human nature are going to be fulfilled in the Catholic Church, and that's what he lays out. So he becomes quite well known. In fact, he was considered as one of the 3 finalists for the post of Bishop of Natchez, Mississippi, which is now the Diocese of Jackson. He doesn't get that job. Obviously, it goes to someone named Elder. I think it's William Elder, who gets into a lot of trouble with the Union Army during the Civil War. So it was just well that Hecker didn't get that job. But that means that he's known in Rome. So that when he appeals to Cardinal Barnabo, who was the head of the Congregation of Propaganda Fide, which is the congregation that's in charge of missionary work, and therefore interested in the United States. And Barnabo is very interested in evangelizing the United States. Well, he already knows who Hecker is, because I mean, this was a candidate for bishop. So he's receptive to Hecker's case. And so Hecker appeals, and this goes on for several months. He spends his time in Rome writing. He writes some articles. And he tries to make his case that the United States, this is again counterintuitive to everybody, that the United States is just ripe for evangelization, that it's just ready to become a Catholic country, which is, nobody thinks this is the case, but they're semi-convinced by him. He's very successful in making his case. There's a famous audience that he has with Pope Pius IX in December of 1857, and Pius points out that the Americans are factionalized, they're quarreling with each other. He says these different political groups, they get each other by the hair, and Hecker says, yes, but the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith will be like oil on troubled waters, and it will calm everything. So that's his vision. That's what he believes. And so finally, on March 6th, the decree was issued, which adjudicated this. Now, what had happened in the meantime, when the other 4 had found out that Hecker had been expelled, they had applied for a dispensation from their vows, that is, for permission to leave the Redemptorists. And so what the Pope did, he attached Hecker to the petition of those 4 and granted all 5 of them dispensation together. So in effect, without saying so, he nullified what the Redemptorist Superior had done. He nullified the expulsion by granting Hecker a dispensation. So this was a nice Roman way of solving it, and everybody's face was saved. Everybody was happy with the solution. In fact,
that took place then, right? That's kind of what we are noting in our podcast for this episode, is that dispensation that took place on March 6th.
March 6th, 1858. And in fact, the Redemptorist Superior had suggested that. He said, well, they could go back to America and work under the local bishop. They don't have to be Redemptorists anymore. That would solve the problem. So that's what they decide to do. So they come back. Oh, Hecker comes back. The others are still here. And he comes to New York, where his brother George has a house. And they meet together, and they eventually, by July, come up with a plan for what will become the Missionary Society of St. Paul the Apostle, which is the first congregation or religious order of American priests founded in the United States.
You can watch the rest of Nick's interview with Father Ron Franco on the Center for Christian History website at centerforchristianhistory.com. We are pleased to have the Christian History Institute sponsor this episode of the podcast. Find free resources and subscribe to their magazine at christianhistoryinstitute.org. This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian History by Blue and Gold Media at Mississippi College, in cooperation with the MC Department of Communication. For episode transcripts and more information, visit centerforchristianhistory.com. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube Music, or wherever fine podcasts are found. Our next episode is coming next week. Thank you for listening.